The biggest mistake in planning is not what happens. It is calling something a risk when it's really just an inconvenience. Happy Friday, everybody. Today is May 8th, 2026, and this is your Friday planning video. Last week, we talked about how plans are built to absorb change. This week, I want to focus on what happens immediately after that change occurs. Because once something shifts, the most important step is not what you do next. The most important step is how you define what just happened. Every financial situation can be placed in one of two categories. It either changes your long-term direction or it only affects your short-term experience. And the challenge is that those two categories can feel very similar in real time. A true risk is something that alters your trajectory. It affects your ability to reach your goals. It changes the structure of your plan. It requires thoughtful and deliberate adjustment. An inconvenience is something very different. It may feel uncomfortable. It may disrupt your expectations. It may require flexibility in the moment, but it does not change where you're ultimately going. The difficulty is that inconvenience often feels like risk. That feeling creates urgency, and urgency creates action, but not all urgency is justified. There's a natural tendency to respond to discomfort as if it signals something important, but discomfort is not always meaningful. Sometimes it's simply temporary. Sometimes it's simply part of the process, and sometimes it is simply the result of expectations not lining up with reality. Let me explain this in a more structured way. When something happens, there are two layers that need to be separated. The first is the objective impact, what actually changed in your plan. The second is the emotional response, how that change feels in the moment. And those two layers are not always aligned. Something small can feel significant. Something temporary can feel permanent. And when decisions are made based on how something feels rather than what actually changed, they tend to be reactive rather than intentional. I've seen situations where short-term disruption led to long-term changes that were not necessary, not because the individual did not understand their plan, but because they misclassified the situation. They treated an inconvenience as if it were a structural risk, and that led to adjustments that introduced more complexity than the original issue. So this week, I want to introduce a very simple but very powerful filter. When something changes, pause and ask, does this change my long-term direction, or does it only affect my short-term experience? If it changes your direction, then it deserves careful attention. If it only affects your experience, then it likely requires patience rather than action. That distinction creates clarity. It slows down the reaction. It gives you the ability to think instead of respond. And that space is where better decisions are made. Because the goal of planning is not to eliminate discomfort. That's not realistic. The goal is to prevent discomfort from driving decisions. When you apply this consistently, many situations that once felt urgent begin to feel manageable. And when situations are manageable, decisions improve. Not every problem is a risk. Knowing the difference is what leads to better decisions. Have a great weekend.